Welcome back to Facing. We're talking about my year-long investigation, the Everglades, where politics, money, and race collide. Our guest, Jenny Seletovich, who covers environmental issues for the Miami Herald, and Michael Grunwald is a writer with Politico, and the author of the must-read book, The Swamp. When did The Swamp come out, Michael? How long ago was it?
2006.
2006. And a lot has happened with the Everglades since then.
We were young then.
We were young then. All right, so when we went to break, we showed a little bit about the debate over the Army Corps of Engineers and their handling of the dike around Lake Okeechobee. The Army Corps of Engineers has always been a very, lightning rod sort of group. They try to portray themselves as being apolitical, just engineers doing science. Michael, is that your impression?
Well, it's funny. I stumbled into the Everglades through covering the Army Corps of Engineers back when I was at the Washington Post, and they are a super political agency. And remember, they were really America's shock troops in the war against nature. And it really started in 1928. After that hurricane blasted Lake Okeechobee through its dike, the Army Corps was brought in essentially to fix the situation. And in the Everglades, 1928 has really been their sort of North Star. They have to make sure that doesn't happen again. So they do not let that lake get high. And since they don't have the natural storage that the Everglades used to provide, because half the Everglades is gone, it's being farmed or it's being lived on by us, they have to blast that water out of the lake to make sure that they don't have another huge hurricane that now that you have, it killed 3,000 people back in 1928 when there was a fraction of the number of people living behind it that you have now.
And let's
so
not
they have to get rid of that water, and that's what destroys the estuaries, that's what destroys the Everglades, that's what creates all kinds of problems because there's essentially no place to store the water.
Well, let's not also forget 2005 being Hurricane Katrina, which is the last time the Army Corps of Engineers was in the news, was over the failures of the dike system in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. They did not want to have that happen again, and it was in 2006, immediately after Katrina, that they set these new standards for keeping the lake levels in Lake Okeechobee in Florida low, which has led to all these problems that we're now dealing with. Jenny, as you sort of have covered this issue as well, you look at what the Army Corps of Engineers has done, and you look at the role of Big Sugar. A lot of people want to just easily, reflectively go after Big Sugar as being the villain. How do you, when you cover sugar, just the reaction that people have to Big Sugar, what do you generally find?
Well, I think people place a lot of blame on Big Sugar for sort of their historic role. They have made progress, like Michael said, in cleaning up the water, but you can't underestimate their historic role in the pollution of the Everglades and the place they occupy now in the Everglades and sort of the block to restoration. Right. I mean, it's a if you take them out of the equation, restoration could probably move ahead.
But is that realistic? Can you realistically ever take sugar out of the equation?
Well, look, I mean, so much of the system is managed for their benefit. And remember, in 2006, Charlie Crist tried. And Sugar, in your documentary, Sugar was saying, oh, this is so terrible. We can't lose all these jobs in the Glades. Well, they were willing to sell out in 2006 when it was in their economic interest. At that time, they didn't
Right.
care at all about those jobs.
And a lot of jobs were lost with mechanization. I mean, that's a lot more jobs were lost in mechanization than the 2000.
They're not a very big industry. They have incredible clout, but they're not even Florida's largest agricultural industry. They're not nearly as big as those nurseries that provide, sod for suburban lawns and palm trees.
Well, you both sort of touched on the impact to the communities. I just want to play this last soundbite, which touches on a number of things, including health. It's two people who supported the idea of taking land away from the South and two people who oppose it. Let's play this for a second.
We live on the Indian River, and during the last discharge session, I actually left with my kids and went to Cincinnati to families because you couldn't walk outside of our house without gagging. It smelled so bad. She has breathing issues, and I was just afraid to have my daughter there. So that's one of the reasons that this needs to be resolved. Thank you.
We know that toxins and blue-green algae can be absorbed into your bloodstream and give you internal problems.
Dr. Stephen Parr is the Director of Emergency Medicine for Martin Health Systems, which runs 3 hospitals in the Treasure Coast.
We know there are ongoing studies examining the relationship between cyanobacteria toxin, blue-green algae toxin, and neurological diseases such as Alzheimer's, ALS, and Parkinson's disease. Since hydrogen sulfide impairs the body's ability to use oxygen, individuals with underlying heart and lung disease are at greater risk of having heart attacks. We had a 50% increase in heart attacks from 2015 to 2016. That's pretty strong, at least circumstantial evidence.
Emotions were just as high among those from the Glades communities.
I can't live with taking up jobs of people who, that's the only way they know how to live, and that's just to work the farmland and provide for this nation.
Buying that land will not solve the problem that we have before us. So when you're considering all these things, we want you to remember there are people, not fish, not grass, and not other things, but there are people that live in these communities that you're talking about.
Jenny, that one little chunk, and there's more on both sides that you'll hear from in the special, but you have 2 people who are part of their community, who are concerned, who say we need to move forward, buy land south. You have 2 people on the other side who are saying, look, our communities are going to be devastated if we lose jobs and land is taken away. We can talk about it as being big business in the abstract, but it really comes down to people's lives.
Well, it does, and that's, I think, so often in the Everglades restoration conversation, you're right, it is talked about in abstract terms, but it really does affect people on the ground, and not that much effort is made in examining those problems. I mean, when the reservoir was being debated, there were a couple studies done on both sides about the jobs lost. Neither one of them were accurate. It would be nice if they went in and objectively looked at what jobs would be lost.
Both sides like to play the game.
Exactly. And I mean, you can't underestimate like the mom dealing with the health. I don't know what the health impacts are. I mean, blue-green algae, as you pointed out in the show, they're doing more studies now. They've done some initial ones, but they need to do more on that. One part that hasn't been addressed is the stuff that happens south of the lake too. In Florida Bay, the fishing guides down there, there's been real economic impacts down there because of
not fresh water being able to come down.
Right,
and that.
Right.
How do you weigh these competing interests when you've got, because again, you can take it to the 30,000-foot level and talk about big government and agencies and dollars and cents, but then you bring it down to people. You have 4 people just in that clip who care deeply about their community and who are opposed to each other's positions.
Well, this is one of these, public policy always does have sort of winners and losers. And there's no question that certainly the communities like Everglades, which, let's face it, has not been doing great for the last, 60 years while the sugar industry has been making billions of dollars. But they would be a loser from a lot of these Everglades restoration plans, while, presumably some of these Martin County communities and Florida Bay communities and, South Florida, the 7 million people living in the ecosystem have an interest in a sustainable ecosystem. Part of the decision that was made in 2000, back when Everglades restoration passed the Florida legislature unanimously and the U.S. Congress with only a couple of dissenting votes, was that this idea that we need to save this national treasure and do something about this messed up water system in South Florida that is a potential crimp to development and agriculture, that's in everybody's interest. That if we can get the water right, that sort of Florida is going to thrive in the future. And so while there are technical questions about how to do that, that is supposed to be the North Star that Democrats and Republicans and right-wingers and left-wingers and Buffalo wingers and everybody is supposed to agree that that's what we're doing here.
Would have been nice if in the process Senate Bill 10 ended up passing. We only have less than a minute now, but Senate Bill 10 ended up passing, and I think folks on the coast think, and down south, further in the Keys, think this is going to be the savior for them. I'm not sure it's going to be as big a savior as it turned out to be. It didn't deal with a lot of other issues that needed to be addressed, including the flow into the lake from the north and the septic tanks. And one thing that I wish it had dealt with, for is the concern that about these communities, it would have been nice if there was some real economic development money placed in that bill. And instead, there was a token amount of money, very nominal amount of money placed in. If you really want to help these communities, and they're going to be the losers, because there are winners and losers. If we think that the Everglades need to be saved, then you have to find a way to compensate those communities and train them and work with them to do something better. You agree?
No, totally. Yeah. Yeah.
I do. I think, again, it's like storage is the answer. And that's so that you can hold water in the dry season and not dump it on people and the environment in the wet season.
We'll be right back after the break.